All right, everyone, welcome to another edition of this collaborative effort here between FWB and On the Ledger, where we're talking about creative custody, among other things. Today, I'm super excited to have one of my best friends, Brian Mark, on the show. This is like Brian and I met on FWB like in 2020, I'm pretty sure, and then
Yeah.
managed to I moved up to Portland in 2020, and then I found out that like a couple of very fun people from FWB also lived here, and so we like became friends in real life, which was very, very cool. And so currently he is the COO at Rumfoords Creative Academy, or sorry, Agency Academy too, but whatever. And and then, but like he's done so many things since in just the last 3 years, everything from being at Adidas to working with me on digital events at FWB and Rally and Dapper Labs and all of these things. So he's been in the front row for a lot of very interesting crypto projects, and we're super excited to dig into all of that today with him.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here. And yeah, it's exciting to see internet friendships turn into real life friendships. Yeah, it's awesome. It's good to see you, Zoe, and you too, Ian.
Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us.
So we do kick off the top of each episode with a surprise and very important question, which was, what was your first concert that you ever attended, and what's the most recent concert that you've been to?
Oh, that's great. So my first concert, I was 14, and I convinced my dad to take me and my best friend to a concert at an amphitheater outside Chicago. It was Leonard Skinner, Deep Purple, Survivor, Off Broadway, and Ted Nugent.
That's incredible. That's like the Toledo Speedway Jam, except in the Chicago suburbs. But
It,
wait,
it totally
who
was.
the hell is off Broadway?
Off Broadway had they're a one hit wonder that I can't even remember the name of their one hit, but they were like very much touring on this one hit, 30 years later still.
Got it.
But it
Wow.
was great.
I
Yep.
don't know that one.
Yeah, let's see. I remember that was also the first time that I ever saw anyone smoke pot. With this, like these like old, they were old, they were probably 40, standing next to us, these like old parents who were for sure like um, out on the town, like having a real good time. Um, yeah, pretty wild. And then the most recent concert was um, 2 weeks ago at the Star Theater here in Portland. I got to see Liturgy, which is a kind of weird avant-garde metal band, but very fun. And I've been really lucky. Portland's a great place to see live music, and there's just like, especially kind of post-COVID stuff. There's so many shows coming to town lately, and I've been to a ton of them. Got a lot of shows lined up for this summer too. Excited.
Excellent. Well, thank
Yeah,
you. That's
yeah,
a
for
good
sure.
opener and icebreaker. Let's go back. Give people some context on who you are. You know, when you and I first met on Discord, I believe you were at Adidas at the time, and talking about Web3 things at Adidas. Adidas has done a lot in that space, and you were there for the beginning on it, and you've moved on to other things. But what led up to that, and how did you find yourself at Adidas and working on that particular project?
Yeah. So I've had kind of an interesting run. I started out. I went to college in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota, and while I was there, I got into bikes. Bikes were kind of everything to me then, and decided to turn kind of the passion that I had for riding bikes into a job. And started out working at bike shops. From there, ended up working at a distributor that made kind of some of the cooler bike brand stuff called QBP. They make Surly bikes and Salsa bikes and a lot of these kind of like cool bike brands. And I realized like that was kind of the unlock for me, was this idea of there being these small communities and these like subcultures, and the idea of like subculture being something that you can build a business around was something that like my eyes really kind of opened up to. There's more than just like the bikes that get sold at REI and Walmart. There's like these niches and these kind of small realms. And I saw like friends starting companies that were these little projects where you could build a brand around a person and around a concept, and then really turn that into something that stood on its own 2 feet. And um, was excited to like Minneapolis at that time was like a very kind of a high vibe city with regards to cycling. Um, I worked in bikes for a bit, and I worked for a few brands, and that was kind of where I learned like brand religion, sort of. And for me, like uh, I followed that religion from working for a company called Nog that made the little silicone bike lights that kind of wrap around your handlebars. They were an Australian company, worked for them for a few years, and then went to Chrome Industries, the guys who make the seatbelt buckle messenger bags. All of these, this is kind of like they're these culty brands, and the idea of like cult classic is something that I'm still like really fascinated by. Um, at Chrome was based in San Francisco. We lived in Oakland at the time, and um, worked for them for a minute. A buddy of mine then came up to Adidas, and I followed him. I joined the team at Adidas in like 2016, working on a team that did retail marketing with wholesale partners. And so we basically would work with like the retailers who bought Adidas product from Adidas and help them build plans to sell it, but also to like to reinforce the Adidas brand message and brand love kind of through those marketing efforts. And um, as somebody who has that brand faith, like Adidas was a great place to work. I mean, Adidas is such a powerhouse with regards to brand, and they really believe it. In my time there, I think I kept kind of pushing at the limits of what was possible with Adidas. Like I was really interested in finding what the limits were of what we could do, and through that, I got connected to some folks who were working on the metaverse stuff that Adidas was exploring. They'd initially put out like a call for submissions, and the call for submissions was basically, hey, if you have an idea about kind of how we can use these new technologies, metaverse, Web3, crypto, kind of any of this stuff. This was like 2020. This was like the summer of 2020. They were like, hey, if you have any ideas about this stuff, like come give us a pitch. And my buddy Kat Miller and she ran digital brand marketing for Adidas Originals North America. She said, hey, let's put together some pitches. And we put together a couple concepts and put them in front of this room. And the response was really strong. And I think I remember the two ideas that we shared. One of them was um, fractional ownership of a community owned store was one of the ideas that we put up. Was basically like, why not open a store in Detroit and say, look, we're going to give 10% of this store to a business, like the community college business program. We're going to give 10% of the store to the Boys and Girls Club. We're going to give 10% of the store to a local small business association, and let those become the stakeholders in creating a business like that. That still like that didn't happen, but it was something that to me, like I watched people's eyes in the room kind of open up as they realized that not only was this like possible, but that there were these emergent technologies that could unlock that. And I think that to me is like, there's something really magical in being able to connect people who can understand consumer concepts, like where the rubber really meets the road, with technical things that are like hard to do. Like they're not easy things, but if you can make those technical things seem easy to people who can understand your dream, it can really unlock like the ability to try and do those. And so um, the concepts that they ended up with were what you saw for the Adidas Into the Metaverse NFT project. The idea of this kind of big 30,000 NFT drop that came with physical merch connected to it, and that was where Ian and I met. Was in talking with Ledger about how Adidas and Ledger would work together on the custody side. Like basically, how does a company like Adidas take in the $30 million or in revenue that they brought in from the project and like handle that? How does Adidas hold a Bored Ape? Like that was one of the first questions, and for me that was the place where I was able to plug in. I'm not I'm not a technical person. I'm not an engineer. I don't do any of that. But like I understand how to explain those technical concepts to I guess apparently to German tax lawyers and to the people who run like that kind of stuff on the Adidas side. So that was the way that I kind of found myself brought into the space, and that was my first exposure to Web3. Like before those conversations, I owned no tokens. Like I had no connection to the space, and so. Yeah, that was really my entree to it, and the team that put that together at Adidas was fascinating. It was a skunkworks team. Like there was no, I think there were two people on the team who it was their full-time job, and everybody else were people like me who were doing this as kind of a fun 5 to 10 hours a week on top of our regular responsibilities. Which, I think in a bigger company like Adidas, there are a lot of people who have that kind of passion, but maybe don't have an outlet for it within their day to day at the job. And, for the brand, I think it's cool to see those kinds of initiatives because it keeps that interest in the workplace rather than letting that energy kind of travel outward.
It's super interesting. I mean, there's a bunch of things in what you just said that I'd like to respond to. I mean,
Let's
first
go.
of all, I think that you and I have a similar reason for doing what we're doing, in that we come from these niche cultures, and we see the way that technology drives all of humanity toward niche, or as I always quote Jeff Jarvis, who in 2008 wrote that culture is moving from mass market to massive niche. So your story about the early bike companies, I think, is very relevant, because it's kind of a direction that our interests have pushed us in anyway, right? But then you see the way that technology pushes things even more in that direction, and then you want to kind of get on that train and help move it along. I think the other interesting thing there is thinking about. I mean, I think Adidas and Nike for me have been really amazing, because they have managed to be kind of big brands that have been able to really take advantage of the notion that culture is moving into niches instead of being pushed aside by it. They've found ways to be authentically a part of niche, whether it's Nike and skateboarding, or what Adidas has done with the Into the Metaverse project. To me, those are examples of brands saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to actually harness this." And I think it's super interesting also that you said that it was skunkworks with inside of a big company like Adidas. It's difficult to kind of be that be that agile. I guess the question I have for you in your own personal journey. I mean, you went really down the rabbit hole then, right? Because you went from Adidas to two pure crypto companies, and now if I'm not mistaken, back to the company who Adidas was using as a consultant to help them get the Into the Metaverse project out the door. So maybe quickly, because there's other stuff we want to be sure we
Yeah.
get into the interview, but like tell us how you got to Rumfords, and tell people what Rumfords is, and what they do, and maybe even how Rumfords has evolved in the last couple of years as the entire industry has evolved.
Yeah, I love it. I met the team from Rumfords while I was at Adidas. They were the consultancy brought on to help Adidas do hard things, to basically do the process of figuring out what their Web3 and metaverse strategy were. And defining that kind of work is something that I think for a company like Adidas, they have really strong executional muscles, but there's a time when pulling in somebody from outside your orbit to say, here's how you should go about this, can kind of unlock or accelerate that process. And that's really how Adidas leveraged the team at Rumfords. I'll talk quickly about kind of how I went down that rabbit hole, and then a little bit more about where I'm at now. So while I was at Adidas, I started looking around, and I realized that I felt really strongly about this Web3 stuff. And one of the guys at Rumfords, Jared Spiegel, the CEO, turned me on to Friends with Benefits. And he said, "Hey, do you know what DAOs are?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "Well, look, you should join this. You should join FWB. It's interesting, and I think you'd get a kick out of it." I was like, "Great. I will go do that." And that was the first token I ever bought. I bought ETH to buy FWB. First time I'd ever done it. I used like Rainbow Wallet on my phone, and I think I had to use Apple Pay a couple times to buy enough ETH to be able to transfer. Once I was in FWB, I realized that there weren't just in the space that crypto could be more than just this financialized kind of game. I'm not really interested in the money side of stuff. I get money is important, but money's not super interesting to me. And the financial tool side of crypto has never really gotten me. I think what I'm more interested in is the social side. I'm interested in how this can kind of connect or unlock things that are otherwise impossible. And that's what I saw in FWB was a community of people from around the world with different interests and different talents, who all kind of saw the same nascent thing, the ability to organize in new ways online. I dove headfirst into FWB. I joined the membership team. I joined the digital events team after that, and eventually ended up on the governance team, doing work there too. I'm no longer a contributor. I hang out in the membership team a little bit and kind of help approve applications and stuff. But from FWB, I found a job opportunity at Rally, RIP, which was the social token platform. The idea was essentially individuals or companies could launch their own social tokens, their own ERC20 equivalent on a side chain, and use those to collect some of the value that their community created. From on that team, I was on the I did content and education, which was essentially the go-to-market function. Um, from there, I transferred over to Dapper, and I joined the Dapper team just after the Dapper Labs team had acquired Brud, the company behind Lil Miquela, and also founded by Trevor McFedries from FWB. So a lot of kind of connectivity there. And I joined there as a product marketer, and what they were working on building were DAO tools. The idea was essentially, how can you build tools to help communities kind of mean more and do more using a blockchain like Flow that was like really low transaction costs, really easy to use, super user friendly. That was a short-lived stop. The team there was kind of folded out. And from there, I found the Rumfords team. I was talking to Jared about kind of what my next move was going to be. And he said, he's like, why don't you just come work for me? And I was like, doing what? Like, what do you want to do? And he was like, well, look, like, essentially what Rumfords had been and kind of is focused on is helping brands do those hard things with emergent technologies. And I think serving as that, like a creative consultancy and a strategic consultancy who can kind of take you from, we need a metaverse strategy, or our CMO is curious about Web3. What do we need to know? Is a really interesting flow. And it's one that I think for us, we found that sweet spot in speaking brand and speaking strategy, and also really loving these new technologies, and in being like really willing to go out and be the experts who live and breathe in the space, who can then bring back those kind of insights in our network and those connections to brand marketers who are interested in adopting those technologies. So in the time I've been with the brand, we've done work with brands like Ralph Lauren. We helped curate the Ralph Lauren and Pool Suite partnership that launched recently. We've done work with Dior, with Givenchy, and with Nike recently too. So we've got a lot of these really kind of fun fashion and luxury brands. That's the space that we want to play in. I think for us, like the reason that we over-indexed in that is just how important that brand piece is for brands like that. You know, I think there's a lot of other great companies out there who are doing interesting stuff in this space. But I think for us, if your brand is a big asset on your balance sheet, like for us, I think that's really where we can help unlock kind of that brand utility using these new technologies too.
Yeah, and then, when you're thinking about kind of the day to day, or like what kinds of things you're helping with, I get the sense that, you're not doing what I see a lot in the biology and life sciences space, which is my other hat that I wear, where we hire these consultants and they come in and they like turn in a deck and then they're like, good luck, see you later. Right. But I get the feeling that like, for you guys, what's way more exciting is like, being kind of team players along the journey and the launch of various products. So can you talk a little bit about like what those engagements look like, and maybe, like what's the most exciting thing for the Rumfords team, like in those engagements? How does that work?
Yeah, I love it. For us, our preferred way of working is truly embedding. Like our goal is to become a part of the organization that we want to help unlock those resources for. Some of that is due to the trust that it engenders. Like a high trust relationship gives you the ability to do more and have more candid conversations. The other piece is that I think for a lot of these brand is in a lot of even really big companies with really well established kind of brand histories, brand is still ephemeral. It's something that really kind of floats around in the company. It doesn't live in one place. And so as a result, when we're working with a fashion house, we want to talk to your archivist, but we also want to talk to your customer service team. We also want to talk to your product team. We also want to talk to your social team, because understanding kind of how each of those teams think about the problem that we're trying to crack can, for us, really unlock like the whole vision, and being that connective tissue that can bounce around inside complex and matrixed organizations is something, back to that skunkworks approach at Adidas, you can kind of be that lateral connector between different parts of an organization who may never talk. they're, 3 levels up, they're maybe connected through their bosses, but like on the day to day, the social team and the concierge team don't have a lot to do with one another. And so for us, like being that team that can talk across all of those is a huge value and a huge unlock.
And then just like in terms of subject matter these days, like I'm curious because you kind of have this like really interesting lens that you're, talking to these brands about. I, you know, what are people wanting to dabble in with emerging technology? Is it still Web3?
So there's two answers here. I think one is we're seeing um, more brands express interest in kind of this second epoch of Web3, which I think to me really points to membership, free or low cost mints. Like this really, it's a really different approach. And it's one that's, I think, far more utopian in my head. It's like an opt-in identity, which is to me really compelling and something that I've been long on for a while. Um, it's also less immediately kind of focused on generating return on investment. It's more focused on kind of long-term customer value, which is, again, as somebody who like loves brand and thinks about it from a consumer perspective, far more valuable and far more interesting than selling somebody a ticket to something via, digital access. So I think that's one side is we're seeing interest from brands on the membership narrative. The other one is on like high price, super luxury, the very focused mint of like, I'm thinking about the Louis Vuitton, the trunks that are coming out, the Dior sneaker that's coming out, like all of those to me are a really interesting expression of another end of the narrative, which is very focused, very premium, very small mints that are, to me, those are kind of they're two ends of the pole. And I'm like really happy to see us moving to those two different sides rather than kind of sitting in this fuzzy middle where we're trying to guess what the right mint price is to mint out a 10K, or something like that. That's not super interesting.
Wait,
The
hold on.
other side,
Let's
yeah. Oh yeah,
let's double click on that for a second because I think that
yeah, for
might
sure.
be one of the things that's interesting to the audience, and I just want to make sure we don't gloss over it because I think you've had, as Zoe just said, you've had this kind of interesting visibility on it from going from whoa, we don't know what it is and it's all kind of opportunity to oh my god, this the bottom fell out of this market and maybe it's even just all scams and evil, right? And I think what you just said, what I've always said to the brands that I work with is, do something that allows you to learn, but not get burned. So stay away from speculation, and do something that is, relatively low risk. But I think you're right. I'm actually seeing exactly what you're saying is that there's one angle on this, which is, people kind of scratching their chin and saying, wait, maybe this is kind of a replacement for a cookie or an email list, and on that level. The other is, this is a tool for for us to connect with our absolutely most valuable and kind of engaged customers, right? And also, I think what's incredibly interesting, and I wouldn't have predicted, is the way that both Nike and Louis Vuitton have done this in a way that is kind of that keeps away from the flipping narrative, the what is the floor price narrative. So I'm curious, from your perspective and Rumford's perspective, what you're seeing in the market and what's your prediction for the next 6 to 12 months from a how will brands participate in this space perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's been interesting to me to see how many brands, I think we all know there's a lot of brands who have shelved projects that have been in the works for the last, 12 to 24 months. Like the life cycle on a project at a major brand is really long. It takes a long time to get things built, set up, approved. Um, I'm guessing that as the bottom fell out of the bull market, there were a lot of projects that were shelved, and I think what we're seeing now is what it took for brands to take that step back and either say, you know what, we're out. And I think there's a lot of big players in brand space who you would have expected to see launch something major by now and who haven't. I think the slow plodding success of projects like Starbucks Odyssey, which is one that I think I'm really bullish on, and I think that there's a case where, to your point, kind of the combination of wallets and email, or like wallets and traditional marketing channels, that becomes kind of the real powerful unlock. And to me, I think some of the adoption that we'll see in the next little bit is going to be driven by partners like Salesforce, who so many brands work with, saying, hey, we now have CRM integration for Web3 products. And that to me feels like it's a maturation that it took a few years to get to. But now all of a sudden, we talk a lot about utility for consumers. Let's talk about that same utility for brands. Like once these tools actually become useful as part of your marketing lifecycle, the desire to do it and the willingness to do it is going to be a lot higher. To your question on prediction, I think that we'll see more projects using these technologies without talking about them. I think there's a really good chance that a major membership protocol launches potentially across brands. There could be multi-brand membership products that launch. There could also be standalone pieces that integrate into existing membership protocols. I don't think we're going to end up seeing kind of parallel paths. I think there was a minute where it was maybe you'll have your regular membership program and your Web3 membership program. I think in reality, we very likely end up at a spot where it's one piece of it. The same way that direct mail is one lever you can pull, and email marketing and out of home and all of these are pieces you can play. I think that Web3 ends up being something that maybe rides under it at the infrastructure layer. Because ultimately, this is it's something that I try and live in, is the idea that, with a lot of these technologies, we have this really thick protocol layer that does all of the work for us. And the app layer is really thin. And I think initially I thought maybe that like early on, I thought maybe that app layer would thicken over time. And I think in reality, what's happening is that app layer just gets thinner and thinner because the protocol does more of the work invisibly, or does more of the work kind of below the surface. User experience can be really thin and lightweight if what's happening under the hood is really complex and really beautiful, and you just don't have to worry about it. So I'm long on kind of more use cases that people don't know about, which is great. And then the other side is I do still think there will be continued interest and investment in these pinnacle properties. I think that the adoption from Sotheby's and Christie's, both at that really high level, the existence and sustained like moderate success of some of the premium art platforms online, like these are good signs for, I think, digital art as an established category that I would expect to continue to exist from an art perspective, but for some brands, especially brands who are at that kind of luxury end of things, to play in as a branding exercise.
Thank you for that, Brian. I think it was great to, because I agree with you on pretty much all counts there. I think it's good to get that out, and for people to have kind of a realistic vision of what happens after this point. I guess what I'll add to that is, it's what you just said is sort of the brand version of, if you follow, there's a great book about technical revolutions, and it's called Technical Revolutions and Financial Capital by Carlotta Perez. It's a very catchy title. But what it says is that in any technological revolution in history, and you can go way back, all the way back to the printing press, or certainly industrialization, automotive, certainly silicon chips, internet, etc. You get bubbles, the bubble bursts, and then you get 30 years of sustained growth. So I like that what you're pointing at there points at the sustained growth phase, and who does what, and it's. I won't say whom, but I've talked to two major brands already today, and it's just Monday in July of 2023. So I know that the interest is still there, and I guess that's maybe the way to kind of wrap up that question is, so what's the interest level you're seeing as Rumfoords? So Rumfoords is a company that is that is a company that one of these brands might call. Are you feeling interest from the market? And I mean, you've already told us a little bit about the way that interest is changing, but what would you say the level of interest is at?
Yeah, the interest is it's different. There's less of the kind of like bulk buzz. We are, I think, to your point, like we're in the trough of disillusionment a little bit. Kind of after the bubble bursts, there's the moment where you look around and. Yeah, that question of is this it is, I think, something that a lot of marketers and a lot of the contexts that we're talking to are, I mean, it's similar to the folks you're talking to probably, Ian, and like it's the CMOs or the chief innovation officers. It's the people who are charged with figuring out what the future of this looks like for their brand. And I think for us, interest is still there. The interest is specifically there around membership and around kind of what that unlock can be. So that meta narrative is kind of taking hold. The other place where there's interest, and this comes from kind of that same level of desire for support on the brand side, is around AI. And, I think that's really, it's interesting to watch how many people, on Twitter and on LinkedIn are like, they very quickly pivoted from their Web3 world to their AI world. But I do think that there's a reason. And I think some of it is that, people expect the very online among us to know kind of what the trend is here and what's happening here. And so we've been having more conversations about AI than I expected us to. And for us as a business, we're thinking about that, not just as a standalone, but from an innovation and strategic consulting perspective. There's a place where those aren't separate, where AI and metaverse and Web3, this all kind of falls into that space of emergent technologies that brands are interested in unlocking the power of. And so, I think we are and are excited to be having more conversations about AI than we did 3 months ago.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I've been saying, and with credit where it's due. I took this from a friend, but that AI delivers digital abundance, and blockchains deliver digital scarcity. So they're also two sides of the same coin. So it makes sense, putting those two things together. Not only because there's obviously a level of interest. AI is at that point now where people are like, I've heard the buzzword and I don't know what it means for my business, which is what you could have said about Web3 in 2021, right? So as a consultant, it makes perfect sense that that's what you'd be doing. But also, I do think that they are two sides of the same coin, and I think that'll be an interesting one to watch play out.
Yeah, I think it's to me it falls into that same boat. Like when people were like, oh, well, what is Web3 or what's this crypto stuff? I think what starts out as a threat for a lot of people transitions into an opportunity with time. The first thing that our brains respond to is, could this be bad for me? And then it takes a little while for it to normalize and for it to become kind of part of the zeitgeist, and also maybe to watch other people make mistakes. I think there is first movers disadvantage oftentimes with new technologies. And so I think with AI, the first question that we hear a lot of the time from brands is, kind of what's the risk in this? They're looking at this and saying, how do we respond to our employees using this? Or, what might this do to our IP? That's a question that we're thinking about a lot is how does this impact legacy IP for brands? Ultimately, I think with time, we'll see that question of how can we leverage these technologies to do more with our IP? How can we leverage these technologies to do more for our employees or with our employees, rather than the kind of initial doom and gloom that I think we tend to see on new technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have kind of two questions on this space, but first I want to just double click on the kind of utility for brands and the membership models that we've talked about. We had another episode in this series a couple episodes ago where we talked with Mel, who did a lot of the tokenomics for Swoosh, and I think the new use case, right, switching to this kind of how do brands deeply engage, right, through these membership models is really interesting. And so I'd love to hear kind of some of the fun ideas for the utility down the line for these membership models. What are the things you're geeking out on there where might not be what you're doing right now, but oh man, you could do this in a year or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think so. One big one there is composable identity, the idea of our wallet starting to become a representation not just of who we are or what we bought, but where we've been and what we've done. An example of that kind of in the real world is with the Ralph Lauren and Pool Suite thing. The idea there was to do a non-transferable token airdrop to all of the Pool Suite executive member holders as a gift from Ralph Lauren. And that gift unlocked, it's essentially just a postcard, it's a souvenir. Postcards are cool and souvenirs are fun. But the idea of saying, look, I held this thing at this time, and now I have something that's with me. This is going to stay with this wallet. The ability to then say, oh, but what can we do with that? So we use that same postcard as an unlock for an RSVP site for an in real life party, or as a claim form for the ability to sign up to get a martini shaker set as a gift from Ralph Lauren that was like customized with Pool Suite swag. Or even, as the ability to then customize your Pool Suite avatar to put them in kind of Ralph Lauren clothes. Um, I think what I start to think about then is, what if you take that little seedling of an idea and say, look, like these are people who now we've connected a dot between an online lifestyle leisure brand and a retailer, fashion brand. Um, what if you start to say, okay, cool, we could build a little constellation of other Ralph Lauren airdrops potentially and say, oh, look, we're able to start weaving a web of people who are connected through Ralph. And there becomes kind of a web, a pool of people who are, um, they've self-selected, but by making a decision earlier. I think there's something. This starts to back to the cookie model. Thinking about kind of what is the new version of digital identity look like, especially not that first layer of identity where we're saying who we are or describing who we are like actively. The passive one, kind of the background identity, the base layer. I think there's a world where you could start to build audiences out of people who are connected like that, which is interesting as a marketer. Um, I think the other side is thinking about rewards. Like I'm really into two token systems. The idea of having something that operates like in a video game, like gold and experience points. I think we're going to see like way more brands start to think about that. I think Dot Swoosh, looks just like it'll point that way. Starbucks Odyssey does too. We're gonna back to Ian. I love the AI abundance, crypto scarcity thing. I think that we're happily for me, at least with regards to like um, non-currency tokens, moving into a place of abundance in crypto. Like there is going to be more. There will be more NFTs in the future than there are today. And I think by an exponential in an exponential way, it's gonna go big. And I think a lot of that will come from things being free and from the ability to really collect like um, more tokens in the sense of like spendable tokens perhaps or exchangeable tokens in addition to things that kind of show up as souvenirs. So I think that two token kind of world is the one that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, you're right. It's so interesting to think about where it goes from an abundance perspective. I think that things will be scarce, sort of by definition, but there will be very many of these scarce things. I
Yeah,
think a lot
totally.
of
Yeah.
I've been thinking lately about how we've kind of screwed up the definition of crypto by making it about quote unquote value. Things only have value if people ascribe value to them. The reality is that we're really just talking about digital stuff. Stuff doesn't necessarily have value. You could think about it as like plastic. Plastic things are scarce, but most plastic is valueless. So that's super super interesting.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing I wanted to circle back on is just like, this kind of the first founder's disadvantage in this space. And I think it's really interesting because you've been in a couple of really interesting, like kind of high hype projects. And I think, I would be super curious, and I think that our listeners would be too, of just like some things that you learned, from, and it is an interesting moment too now, especially since you're thinking a lot about AI, right? We're going to have another bubble, right? Of like, let's throw a bunch of money at AI because like it's the new buzzword, right? And so like looking back, what are some of the things that you think about in terms of like, how to kind of balance like the hype with practicality or like ability to execute or whatever that is.
Yeah, I love that question. Something that I think I've taken away from the last couple of years of wandering around Web3 is I think there's generally been an approach towards starting businesses in Web3 that mirrors the Web2 founder model, where we're saying, look, we need capital intensive, really like development thick product that's focused on building digital things. Because ultimately that's what you're going to get people to pay for. Like I understand that the thing that most people are buying in tech is a digital product, a digital thing that does a thing. I think what I've seen happen a few times is companies come to market with a product that is built super well. It's built really robustly. It's built to do something really, really powerful. But there's no clear vision on how to execute it or on what it actually means or on who it's for. And it feels a little bit kind of Sisyphusian, of like we're building and building and building and building. But if you're pushing it up a hill and there's no reason to get to the top of the hill, there's no one there for it at the top. I've often left after conversations with other founders in the space and like with talking to people in the space, um, just surprised that people are thinking so much about what they're building and not about who they're building it for. And so I think that to me is really central to what needs to be done here. We need to like really humanize what's being built, and that's where luckily for people like me, that's where marketers come is in really thinking about kind of how to connect really great ideas to the humans who we need to uptake those ideas. Um, I think another thing that I'm really long on is an increase in um, um, disposable products. Like I think we're going to see a world, and this goes back to abundance, where there are more purpose-built apps and more kind of application-specific things that are developed because it's going to continue to be easier to develop. I think, we've seen, like, especially with AI being able to write code, and even if it's not very good code, the ability to spin something up that does just the thing you need to do it for just the time you need to, and then to let it go. I think to me, that means that we're going to be able to have companies that leverage developers and leverage AI for development to build something that's very specific and very tailored and is maybe more fleeting. So the idea of digital permanence on the Web3 side is like really powerful and really strong. But I think we're actually going to move into a world of kind of the digital ethereal sort of on the AI driven side, where there's going to be more that gets built, more that gets written than can ever be consumed or understood. And um, I'm personally like very excited for that. It means that we're not going to be trying to use one word editing tool for all of the files that we ever need to touch. We could potentially have a really great, like there are great tools for script writing out there. Like there's specific tools that people use to write scripts. Imagine if you were able to spin up something to write any kind of format of a thing that you were looking to build on kind of a moment's notice and just kind of build application specific applications. There's something that really gets me fired up about that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that vision. We could keep going, but we are running out of time. Where do people find find if people want to get in touch with Rumfords? Just no one would know how to spell that. They would spell it the wrong way. How do you spell that?
Yeah, it's rumfords.com, rumfoords.com.
Perfect. We have a few questions that we ask everyone at the end. And I'd love to see a compilation of these when we're all done. See, we need to like make a trailer basically. But we started this with this concept of creative custody, but realized that means different things to different people. What does creative custody mean to you in your work?
Creative custody to me, I think I connect back to I'm a collector by nature. So I'm the child of antique dealers. I love stuff. And to me, my identity, as I thought about it, even pre-Web3 stuff, is built in part based on the things that I have and the things that I've kind of brought with me. And so I think there's an act of curation that comes into creative custody, but also the ability to kind of acquire and de-acquisition, kind of to build kind of the identity that you want at a given moment as you move through life.
And I think so. The second one, I think we've touched on some pieces of it throughout this, but we're kind of thinking about this in terms of going from jobs or work in the world of information to work on things that are around value. And I think we've talked a little bit about how that has changed from like straight currency to like valuable memberships, et cetera. But we're just thinking through, one of the questions is like, how do you approach that transition, right? For people that are trying to kind of transition from a Web 2 centric industry into more Web 3 and maybe even, AI, emerging technology type projects.
Yeah, I think the unlock for me was finding my people. And for me, that started through FWB, finding people who were doing the kind of work that I was interested in and who were kind of talking about the things that I wanted to talk about, spending a lot of time, engaging in kind of testing your ideas with the people around you, really playing with thoughts was huge. And then just, leveraging that network, like leveraging that connection that you can build to the people around you.
What's something that you think is inevitable and will certainly be a part of our lives 15 to 20 years from now, but sounds like crazy talk today?
That's really hard. I think it's hard for me to not go like bleak and dystopian with that because that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time. But I think that for me, as I think about what the future will look like, I'll give you the optimistic take, which is I think that we're going to move to a place where creative expression is uh, almost limitless and limitlessly accessible for normal people. I think that there are things that today can only be done with huge technology, like high priced rigs and stuff like that. That in 20 years, the ability for you to make a movie that is cinema quality on your home computer or even off of your phone. I think the leaps and bounds that are going to be made there, thanks to cloud computing and AI, it's going to be incredible and is going to unlock like the ability to do more than ever. Like true creative abundance is I think something that we have no idea of how far that's actually going to go in the next 20 years.
I think that I've been thinking about that a lot too. It's like if the internet made it possible for everyone to distribute their zine, AI is going to make it possible for everyone to make a zine, which is, the quality of the New York Times or Time Magazine in terms of design, if that's what you wanted to create. See, I've been thinking of the, Built to Spill line. I want to see movies of my dreams. Like, okay, that's no problem. Then just wake up and tell me your dream, and I'll make you a movie of it, right? That's
Totally.
I don't, and guess who I'm not paying union scale to. Meanwhile, there's a strike in LA right now. This is not unrelated, right? So,
Yep.
Yeah, super interesting to think of where that goes.
And you mentioned earlier scenes, and thinking about kind of like these scenes as being kind of more important and like emboldened. I think what I'm really excited for is just the continued uh, uh, fractalization of those scenes. We're going to end up with just so many like microscopic scenes that, to me, the sense of like inclusivity and ownership and like true freedom that's going to create for people, especially like like young people, that gets me very excited and it makes me optimistic for the creative future that
I think it's, and I just want to clarify for the listener or viewer that when you say scene, you mean the scene like a group of people who gather around one thing, because we were also talking about movies, so they might think of a scene from a movie, but I know exactly what you mean, a scene in terms of like, CBGB's was a scene in New York in the 70s, which has now been broadcast and regurgitated many times. Yesterday, my 16-year-old asked me if who was kind of who was more popular, Harry Styles or the Beatles. And the conversation that we had, of course, is that's impossible to compare, because you're talking about a world with 3 television channels versus a world with TikTok. So, the amount, and this is also where people, they want to draw a comparison like that, but it's impossible, and you cannot extract it from, technology and the means of distribution and, the means of creation, right? I mean, the television and cable television and, college radio and cable access, changed the type of, stars that we had in a way, and there's no question that AI and TikTok and whatever comes after it will do the same. So keeps moving forward. So thank you so much, Brian and Zoe. Glad you guys have each other there in Portland while I'm so very far away. And thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it. Hope we get to do it again.
Thanks so much for having me.
This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.